Everdark Gnoster is never coming out, and no one has ranked all of the Night Lords from worst to best after the DLC, so I'm gonna have to do it myself. Because now is as good of a time as any. Now to be clear, this is a list for Treyus only in Deep of Night, because that's just how I play the game, and how most other people play the game as well. When you see solo footage in this video, it's because I don't have trio footage of what I want to show. Before we get to the list, I know that you've been watching my videos for a million years now, so it's about time you subscribed. Like, I'm almost at 20,000 subscribers, and if I get there, it would be very cool, you know? Also, join the Discord server. We're always talking about these games there, and we have channels for finding people to play with. So join us now instead of suffering with stupid randoms. Anyway, that's enough of me being a sellout. I feel disgusted. Let's get to the lists. At number 18, which is last place, we have Everdark Balancers. Now I know some of you might disagree with this. Like, you might even say there is no way that this very cool looking boss is the worst in the entire game. But hear me out. This fight is not infamous without reason. It's not just probably the hardest fight in the game, but it's also just, not fun. The Balancers are very aggressive. They never give you any room to breathe or revive or like do anything really. They just chase you down until you die. And so the way people deal with this is that they just run away from them and fight them one by one. Which is a cool and unique gimmick, sure. Like, I'm sure you've seen a lot of people describe this like it's a horror game, and it really does feel like that. But it gets repetitive very quickly. And by the way, this is the part of the fight that I like the most. So it only gets worse from here. Now of course, some characters with some builds can just go in and fight all of them at once in melee. But this is very risky and very niche, and so most people are just not gonna do this. Now, normal Balancers is already a very challenging fight, so having us go through a third of that fight before we can even start this one feels brutal. Now, I actually don't know if this fight has more health overall than the default one. Like, some Everdarks don't actually have more health than the regular versions. So it could be that the Everdark phase has 2/3 as much health as normal Balancers. But even then, it's psychologically brutal to say the least. The Everdark phase does not feel like 2/3 of a fight to me. Now, the Everdark reveal is an amazing surprise. The first time you fight this boss. But you know, like in Deep of Night, when you've already fought it multiple times, it fills you with dread if anything. Now look, everything that I said so far almost feels like nitpicking. And honestly, it wouldn't be super difficult to convince me to change my mind on these things. But the slug phase is what really cements this as the worst boss fight in the entire game for me. Like, to start with, the slug looks boring. Like, the boss loses so much aura as soon as the slug spawns. Like, it's just very lame and stupid. They could have went in a million other directions for this, and they would all be cooler. We already have the Ulcerated Tree Spirit and the Elden Beast, and they're both hated. We didn't need another slug thing. Now, for the fight itself, if you can call it that, you can't reasonably deal much damage to this form before the bloom attack. You have to dodge the exact same set of attacks every single time, and all of these attacks are separated by the same dive AoE attack, which the slug does 3 separate times each time that it is summoned. Which is just boring. Like, it's so repetitive, it straight up just feels like a waste of time. Now, don't get me wrong, other bosses have their time wasters too, but like, they usually still allow you to interrupt them, or damage the boss, or maybe they only happen once or twice per fight, or maybe they're not even guaranteed to happen, or at the very least they don't last this long. But if you're not dealing an insane amount of damage, then the slug is scripted to appear at least 3 separate times in this fight, and each time lasts a full minute at least, which is insane. Like, no wonder people hate this fight. And it's a shame too, because the music and the atmosphere are top tier. Now, you can have the slug appear less times if you just have a fuck ton of burst damage. The slug phases have a 2-minute cooldown, and they're scripted to appear at 3 separate boss health thresholds. And if you can deal enough damage in this time, then you can skip these thresholds, and by extension, just skip the second and maybe even the third slug phase. You can't skip the first one though. One of the best ways to do this is to overkill a single balancer. Basically, you want someone that has good crit damage and a parrying tool, and have the other 2 characters use things that deal good burst damage, like Shattering Crystal, or Beast Claw, or a Raider charged attack with a Drake build. The person with high crit damage should get a parry on one of the balancers, and then have the other 2 teammates burst down that one balancer as much as possible. You can also do this with an Executor, since he does have one of the longer repost animations, and one of the best repost weapons in the game with the Cursed Sword. But you know, this is a hyper-specific strategy that requires a lot of setup, you'll never get to do it with randoms, and you will rarely be able to do it with normal teammates. And so it might as well not be worth considering that much, even though it is fun. But, you know, this fight would have been at least a bit higher on this list if the slug just didn't exist or if it only appeared once or twice by default. Like, come on, even with a very dedicated setup, you still have to deal with at least one slug phase, which is like, no, fuck that. Now, don't get me wrong, I understand that the slug is kind of needed to break up the base of the fight, to give you some room to heal or revive or whatever. But I do think that it's way too overused, and honestly, I wish they came up with something different that serves that purpose. At number 17, we have normal Augur. The reason this finds itself this low on the list is because it's just boring. This boss usually takes way too long to defeat, and melee characters don't really get much of a chance to really damage him, unless they're going for a balancer build or if they try to kill some of the tentacle enemies he summons. These enemies deal an absurdly high amount of damage to you for no reason, and they don't really damage the boss that much compared to what ranged attacks can do. Although I still appreciate them being there, because at least they work with defeating enemies, making charging your ultimate be easier. Ranged characters just feel better for this fight, and honestly you feel like you're being punished for using melee characters here. And you know, I don't necessarily mind having a boss that heavily favors ranged characters. But you know, it doesn't change the fact that it's still not that exciting. And it doesn't change the bigger problem, which is that Everdark Augur exists. And I guess we'll talk about why that is a problem when we get to this section. Because yeah, these fights are already disliked, but not knowing which one you're gonna get makes them both worse. The highlight of this fight for me is the nuke he drops, where you pretty much have to run away as far as possible or use ranged attacks to destroy it before it lands and fucks up everyone. There is nothing really like this in any other FromSoft boss. But yeah, unfortunately this is the only exciting moment in this fight, because otherwise there really isn't much to it. At number 16 we have regular Adel. The reason this fight finds itself this low on the list is that it simply has zero challenge. It's a very basic fight and it's probably the easiest one in the entire game. Like, you're basically guaranteed to win it every single time, usually by melting the boss in seconds. Everdark Adel is actually one of the only fights that has more health than the original, instead of just having the same amount. He has like 20% more HP and he's much harder to hit, so it feels like it's even more than that. And honestly, it does feel like normal Adel needed that health increase to feel more like a real Night Lord boss fight. I kinda wish they switched health bars if I'm being honest. Now I understand why this boss is so easy, like it's only the second boss you're supposed to fight in the normal mode, but this is Deep of Night. They could have definitely given him more here. Of course, we do have to mention how this boss straight up just makes your game freeze in his second phase sometimes, despite the game being almost a whole year old at this point, which is just unacceptable. The coolest thing about this boss is of course when you poison him in the first phase and he starts puking everywhere and giving you a huge damage window in the process. There really is nothing like this in any other FromSoft boss, but it doesn't feel very satisfying because the boss is already very weak anyway, so it feels less like an epic moment where you somehow stun this impossibly powerful ancient dragon and more like shooting a fish in a barrel. I think that this gimmick should have stayed for the Everdark version, where it would have been much more satisfying and it would have solved all the problems that I have with that boss fight. Well, almost all of them, because that fight fucks up your PC just like this one does. Now, I would be lying if I said that I never feel relieved when I see this fight, but this is only because I'm basically guaranteed to not lose any points, and I wouldn't exactly call that fun. And of course, when you stop caring about points, then seeing this fight would just feel disappointing. Number 15 is regular Tricephalos. Take everything I said about regular Adel being too easy and apply it here, only slightly less. There's still an element of danger that the dogs pose, specifically when they split up and start ganking up on you, which does add a bit of excitement, or bullshit if you don't like that part, or both. But only a bit, not that much, because this is still a very simple fight and a guaranteed win. Number 14 has to go to Everdark Libra. Now this placement may be controversial, because some will think it's way too high. Like it's the worst fight in the entire game for a lot of people out there, because a lot of people think it's unfair. And you know what? I'm not here to say anything different. It is unfair, and I wouldn't really place it any higher than this because of that. Like yes, Libra simply summons too many NPCs too often, and it makes the fight very difficult to manage. But I would be lying if I said that I don't have some fun with this fight overall. Unlike Everdark Balancers who are repetitive and boring, this fight actually feels chaotic and unpredictable, which makes it more engaging to me. But that's more than enough positivity. Let's talk bullshit. Because of all the chaos going around, it's way too easy to get caught in one of Libra's Ground Ring AoEs. Like usually these are telegraphed by looking at the boss himself, like you know it's coming when he clutches his hand, and it's pretty easy to avoid it if you see it coming. But looking at the boss is not always an option here. Sometimes the only way that you'll see this attack coming is when it actually starts forming on the ground, and the time you're giving to dodge it is way too short, especially for how much damage this attack deals. Like this can easily one-shot you even if you're a tanky character with negation passives, which is just never fun. Besides the NPCs getting summoned too often, this is my biggest problem with this fight. And I really do wish they just extended the time this attack takes to activate, even by just a little bit. There are a few ways that you can use to make the NPCs easier, like some of Recluse's more powerful cocktails like Lightning Stake or the Gravity Orb have the potential to one-shot the NPCs, or at least deal some very heavy damage to them, depending on your build. Other ways you can use to deal with the NPCs would include things like the Vike's War Spear, which is very powerful against them and procs madness pretty quickly. Scalar's ultimate is obviously very useful here, and Duchess's ultimate is very good here because it can give you a window to fight the NPCs one by one, revive, or just focus on the boss himself. There aren't nearly enough ways to deal with the NPCs that I would consider this fight to be not problematic. But you know, it's not pure trash, which is more than what most people would say about this. At number 13, the only boss that we can really have here is Everdark Augur. Now I've actually come to like this fight more as time went on. I think it's a decently fun fight. It has cool visuals and good music. Some attacks are fun to dodge, and of course there are a few ones that are just janky as fuck, like the PlayStation 1 graphics water wave, which is pretty stupid. Overall, it's not a very difficult fight, and I do especially enjoy the part where you have to kind of aim the weapon to shoot down the small bubbles that surround the boss, in order to stop it from being able to shoot lasers at you. Like, yeah, there is nothing like this in any of the FromSoft games, so it is very cool. But I do still obviously hate this version of the Storm Ruler. It's basically an upgraded version of the Dark Souls 3 Storm Ruler, which is pretty slow and not very fun to use. The Serpent Hunter in Elden Ring was fucking perfect. I really wish they just gave us a version of that and designed the boss around it instead. Like, this weapon is so much more fun to use because of how it actually has a full moveset and not just weapon arts. And you know, the player having better attack speed would have allowed the developers to make more things that you can destroy by properly aiming your weapon. So the fight could have been much more unique that way. The thing that really holds this fight back from being any higher is the fact that it makes most character abilities, relic builds, and weapon passives just be useless basically. You simply cannot land most of your character abilities on this boss. And like for relics, you basically always want a double balancer build because all the damage that you deal is weapon art damage, and this is a big increase to that. And this is one thing that would have made the Serpent Hunter a better choice, because you wouldn't need to rely on weapon arts with that weapon. For weapon passives, you want magic damage negation. Taking damage plus damage negation and negation at full HP still work here. You also want skill and magic attack power for damage, and that's kind of it really, because most of the other things aren't that useful. The problem is that having your weapon passives and relic setups look like this doesn't really work with most characters. It probably doesn't benefit you much for most of the run, and it definitely doesn't work well if you end up getting normal Augur. And like again, because this is Deep of Night, you cannot tell whether it's this version or the normal version until you reach the actual boss. And like, things get even worse when you take this into account, because like, well, you can only deal magic damage to this boss, but the other boss is strong against magic damage. Squishy ranged characters are disadvantaged against this boss, because of how they're basically using the exact same weapon as everyone else, while also having less health and little to no abilities to compensate for that. But those same squishies are basically needed if you're fighting normal Augur. So yeah, preparing for this fight is a nightmare, and it just doesn't feel very good. It doesn't feel like an intentional sort of challenge that they put in place, but rather like an awkward problem that they just didn't solve. Now, Everdark Augur was basically the last of the bad bosses on this list, because every other boss going forward is gonna be pretty solid in my opinion. At last place of that list though, we have number 12, which is Everdark Gnoster. This starts with one of the worst attacks in the game, so you really know it's a good boss fight. This roar deals an unreasonable amount of damage, and then the running attack afterwards is just painful. Like, you have this huge boss chasing after you, they're shooting projectiles all over the arena, they summon a stupid fucking orbital laser, and they even end with a giant AoE attack, and tons of projectiles too. This wouldn't be nearly as bad if you could actually use an offensive ultimate to stop this attack, but no, you can't. For me, this is one of the worst design decisions in the entire game, and I just hate it. Like, this is a very dangerous attack, and I just used my very valuable ultimate. Why can I not stop it? When this attack ends, you start fighting the normal Gnoster second phase, except you know, they have much less health. This fight is like fine. It's your average monster fight with some well telegraphed attacks and some very annoying AoEs. Once you take them down though, the real fight starts. Gnoster basically goes back to being a duo boss. But with a catch, in that there is a third boss called Animus that can revive either of the two bugs to create a stronger red version of them, and you have to attack that in order to kill Animus and end the fight. If you take too long to kill one of the bugs though, then Animus will just summon a billion orbital lasers and a nuke on your ass, which are just some of the most frustrating and least fun attacks to dodge in the entire game. So this fight is just a DPS check. If you have good DPS, then it's one of the more decent duo fights in the series. And if you don't, then it's very frustrating. Overall, it's a fun fight, but I hate the orbital lasers, and there is nothing too exciting about it that would make me place it higher. 6 out of 10 would have been better as a Hollow Knight boss, even the music would fit better there. At number 11 we have regular Gnoster, and yes, I do prefer this over the Everdark version, because it's simply less annoying. Like, you can actually have fun with this even if you've had a bad run and don't have a billion DPS. The two Gnoster fights are basically the first time FromSoft really tried to make a Remembrance duo boss since the Demon Prince in Dark Souls 3 Ringed City DLC, which is like 9 years ago at this point. Every other duo boss since then has basically been a glorified mini-boss, and nothing else really, which is sad. I do think that aside from some annoyances like the poison clouds or the stupid nuking attacks in the Everdark version, they did a decent enough job. But definitely not on the level of the Demon Prince, Ornstein and Smo, or even Frida and Father Ariandel. This fight starts as a duo fight where ideally one person focuses on the mouse to keep it away from the Scorpion, who the other two teammates should focus on. I do like this because it kinda encourages you to have a decent team composition, instead of going all in one way or the other, which is always cool. In the second phase, they combine, they do one of the worst attacks in the game, and they become an average monster fight. I basically talked all about this phase in the Everdark section earlier, so no reason to talk about it again really. At number 10 we have Caligo. Caligo is not a very challenging fight. It cares much more about spectacle than anything else. And while the music and the visuals are some of the best in this game, the problem is that this is a Deep of Night list. Like, you will face Caligo quite a few times, and the novelty will wear off eventually, so while spectacle is important, you need good gameplay to back it up. Fortunately though, the fight is so unproblematic while also being just fun enough that I wouldn't really place it any lower than this. Like, this is the first fight that we talk about where it's just a fun fight, and there's not much more to it than that. This fight focuses almost purely on positioning rather than reflexes or dodging any quick attacks, which does feel like a nice change of pace from some of the other fights. Because even though this dragon fight is definitely more similar to ancient dragons than it is to Midir or Bale, if you have good positioning, you get plenty of chances to target its head and deal more damage and stance damage. There is a small problem with this fight, which is the ice shards that appear on the ground, which do feel a bit random, but even then they're not that punishing for the most part. At number 9 we have Everdark Caligo. This is the Everdark fight that is the least different from its normal counterpart, so it makes sense to place it here. I do think that Everdark Caligo is a bit of an upgrade though. Like, the random ice shards are now just gone, which makes the fight just feel better. Of course, the big new attack that this boss gets is the one where it shoots a crystal to summon an ice storm, which, if successful, basically guarantees that the whole party will get frostbitten, which is very dangerous. This is usually the kind of stuff that people despise. But honestly, it's not that bad at all here. Like, sure, you get a defense buff and you basically lose a flask. And yet it doesn't feel too punishing. Especially when you consider that it's pretty easy to avoid most of this boss's attacks. So the defensive debuff doesn't even come into play much. Now that I think about it, it's very likely that they removed the random ice shards specifically because of this ice storm, because them overlapping would just be a nightmare. Now, you can obviously just prevent the ice storm altogether by interrupting the crystal shattering attack using an offensive ultimate. But the window for doing that is just small enough that positioning actually matters here a lot for most characters. And so this attack adds a new layer of challenge that you just don't get with the normal version, which is why this is higher. Now, I do kinda wish that this fight had these two attacks where Caligo just fills the entire arena with fog and does something very cool, but I do understand why they removed these attacks from this version. Like, these fights are already similar enough, and these two attacks help differentiate them a little bit. Now, I really didn't talk about the real big addition to this fight, which is the ice armor that Caligo gets. And well, it's just fine. I do kind of enjoy destroying multiple armor pieces at once to get big damage. This part does feel satisfying, but otherwise this is just an okay addition and nothing else. At number 8, we have Fulghor. Fulghor is a great fight, but it's not a fight that I have much to say about, and that's fine. Not every boss needs to be super gimmicky. This is just an honest-to-god solid fight. I guess there is one gimmick here though, and it's that one attack where he summons golden lances from the ground. Usually this would just be a normal attack, but the gimmick here is that you can interrupt it if you use lightning or deal enough stance damage without having to stance break the boss himself. If he's already debuffed by lightning, or if you interrupt him without using lightning, then he will still do a weaker version of this attack. And attacking him in this state without lightning will slow you down until you interrupt him or the attack goes through. Overall, it's a fun little gimmick. It makes it so finding a source of lightning is very rewarding for this fight, but it's not like the entire fight revolves around it or anything, so it's a pretty inoffensive addition. Now Fulghor has a good mix of melee attacks, AoEs, and gap closers. Like, he does move around a lot, and so you need to pay attention to him at all times no matter which character you're playing. But he's never too hard to hit the way Everdark Adel is. The second phase gets a bit chaotic with its attacks, but they're still very easy to dodge, and I do love jumping over the AoEs in this phase. It's so much fun. Another thing that I like to do with this boss is to use Raider's ultimate to interrupt his dashing attack. You might not have known that this is possible, but you can absolutely do this if you time it correctly. And it is a bit forgiving because Raider's ultimate actually has some insane range now. At number 7, I have normal balancers. This might be a little controversial. Many people would probably place this boss lower. There is just so much hate around the balancers at the moment, especially because of how it feels like you get them every other run or so. But for me at least, I only hate the Balancer Expedition because of the potential that I would get Everdark balancers. But honestly, I don't mind the regular version at all. Just like the Everdark version, it's one of the coolest fights in terms of like the visuals and the music. The coordinated attacks that they do are some of the most visually pleasing and fun to dodge attacks in the entire game for me. And their normal attacks are so goddamn slow that it's pretty easy to just outmaneuver them or avoid them entirely. And parrying them is not that hard either. And one very good thing about this fight is that the balancers deal pure physical damage. So you can block any of their attacks without getting any chip damage. And Guardian mains don't have to suffer much here. Like, I just never feel that this fight gets super offensive or anything. The ganking is usually not much of a problem because of how slow the balancers are. So it's a perfectly okay fight in my opinion. At number 6, I have Everdark Fulghor. I do see this fight as a bit of a step up over the normal version. I think that the first phase of the normal fight is maybe a bit too simple, and the fight only really gets going at the second phase. But this fight starts in that second phase and has a pretty cool third phase as well, so it's exciting the whole way through. Though the third phase does lose out on that one attack where Fulghor summons golden spears from the ground. And this is why some might say that the regular version is actually harder than this version. Although I kinda disagree because his attacks are much harder to dodge in the third phase, at least for me. In it, Fulghor starts to swing his weapon like a twin blade. He's very aggressive with his attacks, some of them you need to dodge, others are too fast to dodge so you need to strafe them instead. He also starts using his weapon as a bow sometimes. He can just do a random shot, he can fire a rain of arrows, or he can even just fly and fire a nuke, which is pretty cool. Overall, this is just a better version of an already fun fight, which is why it places this high. At number 5, we have Everdark Adel. This is one of the most chaotic fights in this game. His moves are by no means hard to dodge, but he constantly switches targets. He covers a lot of distance and he has a lot of AoE attacks, so you really need to be careful here. It's a very solid fight, and the gimmick here is unlike anything else in the entire series. He summons a tornado that deals damage all over the arena, and you have to find the Spirit Spring to get inside the tornado so that you can fight him there until it disappears. And you know, this entire sequence just feels awesome. Like, again, there is just nothing like it, and I will never forget the first time I had to do it. I just couldn't believe that they really did this in a boss fight. And it made me so excited to check out all of the other Everdarks when they would drop. So yeah, absolute cinema. The best part about this is that even though it's technically a phase transition, you can totally just cancel this with an offensive ultimate and just avoid having to deal with it if you don't want to. The tornado does make the playable area a whole lot smaller, and yet it never feels too small or annoying, despite how much the boss moves. And you know, this is something that I never considered before making this list. It's not something that you even think about. But like, yeah, they could have easily messed this up, but they didn't, which deserves credit. The only problem with this boss is that because of how much he moves, melee characters just cannot hit it that much. They can barely damage the boss at all unless they have some sort of ranged weapon art. So what usually happens is that these melee characters will just draw the boss's attention while ranged characters deal the real damage. I used to hate this, but I'm honestly fine with it now. Specifically because distracting the boss is actually useful here. Because even though the boss has a lot of AoEs, many of his attacks are just him trying to bite one person, which does allow ranged characters to target him and actually deal damage. And you know, if you happen to have a raider or a guardian with a lot of health and negation passive, passives and your team has decent enough DPS, then them getting intentionally grabbed by the boss is like unironically a viable strategy. Because even though Adel gets a big damage buff out of it, the damage window that you get is so long that it's honestly worth it most of the time. At number 4 we have Everdark Tricephalos. This fight is almost perfect, even though the boss itself deals much more damage than you would ever expect it to. But you shouldn't let that high damage intimidate you, because this is one of the easiest bosses to learn. Pretty much all of the moves here are well telegraphed. They feel very intuitive to dodge and you will get used to them very quickly. If this is one of your first times fighting this boss, then sure, it will feel incredibly unfair and maybe even unfun for some. But once you get the hang of it, it's one of the most fun fights in the entire game, and definitely the best ever Dark boss. There is only one attack that I don't like in this fight, and it's this one right here. It's this coordinated dash attack that the wolves do when they recombine in the second phase. Like most other attacks in this fight, they deal an insane amount of damage, but they're well telegraphed, so they're not that bad. Except for the final dash attack. When the main wolf dashes, another fire dash attack follows right after. And if your camera is locked onto that dog, then you will be positioned in such a way that this attack is very difficult to dodge, because the game will make you turn around to face that dog and then the follow-up will come from behind you, which is really unfortunate because this attack can easily one-shot you. I do like to play this game with my camera locked on, and while there have always been situations where you benefit from not locking on to your enemies, I've never seen an attack directly punish me for locking on to this extent, and I just don't like it. At number 3, let's talk about Gnoster, the Night Lord himself, the big bad of this game. What is even there to say about Gnoster? He's the king of spectacle. He has the best jaw-dropping moment of the entire game, maybe even the entire series, where he splits the fucking sky only to then use the power of another Night Lord to fuck you up. This fight is a masterclass in deception. You just never know who the boss is gonna target next. He has some very wide swings and it's very easy to get caught in them even if you weren't even the target. And of course we can't forget about this one combo, where it's like the boss says, "Okay, I'm done, hit me now," only for him to say "psych" and attack you right after. Of course it's not like you'll be tricked by this when you've already fought him multiple times, but I still get hit by it sometimes when I overestimate how much time I have to hit him before I need to roll. When you memorize all of his moves, and once you realize that you should probably dodge every move even if you think it's not gonna target you, this becomes one of the most enjoyable fights in the game, even if it's a little bit too simple. At number 2, we have Libra. Libra is one of the most fun and creative bosses in this game. He has a good mix between melee combos, projectiles, and ground explosions, and the way these overlap give this fight a very exciting and chaotic feel. And yet the developers had enough restraint to never really make it feel unfair. Like, it's all very manageable if you have good positioning. And even the stupid ground ring AoEs are very easy to avoid if you know to expect them whenever the boss clutches his hand. I do like the central gimmick of this fight, where he enters this meditation phase and he transitions into one of two different phases based on whether or not you're able to interrupt him before he finishes meditating. You can interrupt him by breaking all of the sigils around him, or by using an offensive ultimate. The number of sigils increases every time he meditates, and by the third time, or when he reaches a certain amount of health, the sigils become too many for you to ever be able to break them all. So you only want to break them the first 1 or 2 times, and just save your ultimates for any meditations that come after that. I do really like that you can just use an offensive ultimate to break him out of this. Like, this is just good game design. A lesser fight would only allow you to break it by breaking the sigils, and just force you to endure the harder phase when the sigils become too many for you to break. But a lesser fight this is not. They actually got it right this time. The only complaint I have about this boss is that I wish some of the deals he offered were a bit better, so that you would be more incentivized to actually pick them and have your run be a bit more different each time. Number 1 is obviously the Dreglord. Gregory, because who else could it possibly be? Was there ever any doubt? This is the most balanced and fair fight in the entire game. Not once did I die to this boss and thought it was the game's fault. This is also one of the longest fights in this game, if not the longest even, because he has 2 giant health bars. But the game easily gets away with it because of how easy it is to dodge his attacks. Like, he's very aggressive, but his moves are easy to read, which is just perfect. The one complaint I have about this boss is how you're unable to use your ultimate to interrupt his big AoE attack that summons the Scarlet Nightreign. I don't really mind the forced status effect here, and neither does almost anyone. It really doesn't do much, but I do wish that we could interrupt this attack. Now, aside from regular Augur, this is the only boss that summons ads, and well, hear me out. I wish more bosses did that. There are many buffs in this game that only benefit you by defeating enemies. Like defeating enemies to restore ultimate gauge is one of the most useful relic effects in the entire game, and there are other buffs that give you back health or FP when enemies are defeated. But these perks are usually just useless when you actually reach the day 3 boss, and this fight actually lets you make use of them. This is exactly what most other RPGs and roguelikes that have abilities like this do, and it feels nice to have it here. If you have a caster that maybe takes out as many of these trash mobs as possible, you can actually benefit a lot from this, and of course you prevent the Dreglord from buffing himself. And of course Scholar can come in handy here by using his ultimate to transfer the damage dealt to these adds to the Dreglord. I do think that the addition of adds here was maybe done to provide sustenance to teams that have at least one of these perks, which is, you know, like almost all of them. And they might have done that because of how long this fight actually is. And you know, I always thought that Elden Ring was a bit lacking when it comes to having fights that are actually this long, while also having a ton of variation. Like, I thought Gale and Frida from Dark Souls 3 would set the standard going forward, because of how each of them had 3 phases and tons of moves. But they really didn't, and most bosses in Elden Ring really didn't live up to that. But this boss does, and it's everything that I ever wished for. Anyway, that's the whole list. Of course, everything I said in it was objectively correct. You're welcome to tell me what you think in the comments, as long as you know that you are wrong, even if you agree with me. Anyway, see you later. Bye-bye!